Da, 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 da. What's my good cheer? Welcome, welcome, everybody. I hope nobody was staying up specifically waiting for me to come in, but it is what it is. I just came out of a shower. It was like, oh, it was so amazing. I stood underneath that faucet. I swear for 20 minutes, just like this. It was so amazing. Actually, today, even though I didn't do anything, for me, it was a perfect unwind, decompress kind of day. I love the rainy days, and this was one of the first ones of the year, coming out of winter. And it was just lovely sitting here with my big picture window and just listening to the rain for the most part of the day. I was in contemplation, so I didn't even have the computer on or music going on or anything. I was just right, just with my thoughts, maybe piddling around the house in those thoughts. This week we got this word grace. It gave me some thought this morning. It seriously did. It made me wonder, how did I come up with all those words, all those powerful words? When I got that word grace yesterday, right off the hop, I was excited about it. Right away came to mind the story I was going to tell. And before we ended the live yesterday, I says, well, tomorrow I might do a little bit of Googling. I might do a little bit of Googling and I like having Wikipedia being one of those perspectives, because that is a cooperative uh, space where information is put there, and it's more of a poll kind of manner. It is a kind of a majority kind of rule, because if there was any discrepancy, right, in that, it would be taken down in a moment. I do like Wikipedia. I'm just coming into Wikipedia right this moment. I hope everybody is having an amazing, amazing day. I found it really is interesting, when I went in and was looking at the definition of uh, grace. I understood grace was a form of a miracle, but I didn't understand what kind of miracle it actually was. I'm just gonna come out of this and go back into my YouTube, just because it's in dark screen there and it won't reflect in my face. There we go. Much better. So I went into Wikipedia today, and it said that grace was an undeserved miracle. What? What? What's that about? And it slowly, just like drip, 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 in a span of 30 seconds or something, the understanding of, that undeserved miracle is not saying that you're an evil person. You don't, right? The only way that you're going to survive is if, right, something steps in and resolves the issue for you, or, right, steps in. The miracle is actually that chance that you never had. When I was telling that story yesterday about the moth in the pond, and it was twirling around the water pump, and it was about to get sucked under in the pump, and my little rescue mission, and the miracle of it, you know, in that drip, 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 when I went into Wikipedia, it made, at first, I went, oh my goodness, why was I telling the story of the moth? How did the moth come into the conversation? But when I actually took in the understanding of about this word grace that we had, and the way Wikipedia said it was undeserved, it wasn't like undeserved, you're bad, you haven't earned it. It was undeserved in the way that There was no possibility of it not being a disaster or it not being the end. That the only possibility, right? It's like falling out of a plane without a parachute. You know you're going to hit the ground, but you have a few minutes in that span of jumping out or falling out or being pushed out of the plane before you hit that ground. And right, that praying to God and right, hoping for that miracle, and what a miracle that would be. And there have been miracles where people, that has happened to people and they've hit the ground and lived to talk about it, to tell their story. I was actually even last week, I watched a documentary on a pair of brothers who were on those window washing. It was like over 40 flights up in this skyscraper, and they went down and they hit the ground, and he survived. His brother did not, but he shouldn't have survived either. Right, right, but that's the thing, he shouldn't have survived. It should have been the end, and grace stepped in, right? Grace stepped in. Grace is the evidence, right? Grace is 100% the evidence that there is something or someone out there, right? Being the driver behind the wheel. I do believe that for myself, right? But what that is, I have no idea, but in those experiences that I've had, in those moments of grace, and there have been moments of grace where, right, that's the evidence. That's what gets you closer to believing. And this week we got this word grace, and it makes me think, right? Is there something where we were moving into where there was no chance that we were going to miss that ball or miss that meteor, that whatever it was, that there was zero chance, that in the evidence something might step in, right? Or should step in or will step in, right? And be the evidence of what the impossibility could turn into if we had a little bit of, I don't know, sometimes it's just that belief, right? Because those miracles happen at our very lowest, when we are most connected to anything, right? That might help us get out of that situation or come out of that grief, or right, come out of that illness, or right, come out of that absolute desperation or that lack of joy that I see so much of out there, right? It's it's an opportunity, Grace, to step in when it's most needed and not necessarily the most deserved. Did I deserve to wake up to any of these ideas any more than anybody else should have? No, but it might have been in my experiences, right? It might have been just me recognizing those experiences and the lessons within those experiences that made it possible for me to show up and maybe be the one to be sometimes brave enough, right? I know some of these conversations can sound silly, but they have to be. They're only silly until they're not silly anymore, until something hits. I had no idea. I knew grace was a miracle. I also knew grace was attached to forgiveness quite often. It makes sense if people think it's an undeserved miracle. Grace is an undeserved miracle. And like I said, not not undeserved as in you're bad, you're not getting none of this, right? That that Santa Claus gift list, the naughty girl and the right, the good girl on the list. I have a funny way of explaining it, but it is what it is in the conversation, and I hope, right, the message shines through, if not the pronunciation and the makeup of the lesson, the sentences, and what I'm trying to get across, right? Grace, it is a word that made it to a list, and it made it into a deck of 54 cards, and it made it to a list without me truly understanding what it really meant, right? I just felt that grace was something that, right, somebody stepped in because somebody truly needed it. And I guess that's, when I told that story yesterday about the moth, right? That moth needed some grace. I needed that grace that day, that miracle, because it was a miracle. There was no way that that should have happened, and no way in that great graceful thank you that that moth gave me, and its calmness and understanding that I wasn't there to hurt it, right? And then how that whole story played out. And Nancy's heard this story about the moth before. Hello, Nancy. Hello. What are you doing up so late? Nice to have you pop in today. For those of you who pop in later, right? I hope you're having an amazing day, Nancy. Thank you so much. We were just talking about grace and Wikipedia's definition of grace, and they were saying grace is an undeserved miracle. And I thought, in rephrasing that, grace is a miracle where there was no chance of anything else but catastrophe or something ending or some desperate sense of grief or disappointment or heartbreak, that something stepped in and lifted that up. That grace is the evidence because, right, whatever it manifested in its place wasn't meant to move forward as uh, with ease or move at all. Maybe it was, right, supposed to be the end of that relationship, the end of that life, right? And for something, right, it stepped in. I have witnessed miracles myself, not just online, not just in searching it out and looking at it, but again in those desperate moments in my life where, right, we make promises. And maybe it's meant to bring attention to maybe some of those promises that I didn't really have much of a choice when it came to religion. My father didn't discuss his spiritual ideas, even though he was an example in some of his interests. My mother was devoutly Christian. What denomination? I don't know if it really mattered because we covered the bases of almost all the denominations when it comes to Christianity, right? But my mother ruled the household, and because my father, right, didn't pull us into his way of thinking and his way of living and his way of believing, that other than, right, living by the quotes that he so enjoyed raising his family in, right, for the most part we followed suit with, right, my mother's wants, needs, and beliefs. And I went along with that, not having a choice. So it was a Christian God for sure that I prayed to, right? But I do believe going back for centuries, it was probably a Christian side at very least on my mother's side, because we do have the family tree going back. We have lots of bishops and archbishops and nuns and stuff going back. But, you know, Grace, it really was interesting to find out what it was. And in the end, right, it still made my story of the little white moth a perfect example of grace, because that moth wasn't supposed to survive, right? And a miracle happened for that little white moth, and in being a participant in that experience, I got to experience that little bit of grace. If I didn't recognize, well, I must have recognized the grace if that was the first thing that came to mind yesterday when we got the word, right? So it must have imprinted in me, right? Even without me truly understanding that it was a good example. I would have been a little bit embarrassed if I was totally off the mark on that one, but right, I am glad to have a better understanding of that word grace. This world could use some grace. This world could use some evidence, right? This world could use some evidence. Ah, oh, that I'm giving, and that's how I put it. That's how I put it a little bit yesterday, Nancy. Right? That moth got a second chance, right? But it was really interesting to find out that it was an undeserved miracle, at least in consideration to the Bible, and right. And I just rephrased it a little bit, right? Because it is true. It's a miracle is right when you come to the very last. I always say you never give up. You adapt and conquer, but at the same time you don't cry over spilt milk. And that phrase, you don't cry over spilt milk, is that's the end, because the spilt milk, there's nothing you can do. You've spilt the milk. All you can do is clean it up, right? All you can do is clean it up. Yeah, so interesting if maybe there could be some grace in the world and we could be a little bit receiving in the grace, because I suspect miracles are the ones that make our eyes pop out of our head to say, how did that happen? How did that little old lady lift that car over her head to save that child that was stuck under the tires, right? And we look at this and we just like, right? We need more of those in the world right now, just so that the world could recognize that, right? Miracles do happen, and that we are on the right track, because those miracles, when they show up, is showing us that we are worth putting those miracles into. And I think we were worth it. I think we deserve those miracles sometimes that help to get us better on track, those miracles to give us a little bit of optimism that everything is going to be okay, right? I truly believe everything's going to be okay. I really do. I don't feel it. I feel those moments when things are really, really messed up. That's why it's a little frustrating when I go into the news, and right, it's compounded so thickly and specifically meant to agitate me, right? And it does its job, but it didn't need to, right? Yeah. Okay. Am I buffering, Nancy? Seems pretty good on my screen here. Maybe it's your channel. Maybe I'm buffering. I don't know. I show up, right? It's really going to be neat how we look at this word grace tomorrow, knowing we know now, but take a look at it in a different perspective with a better understanding of the world and maybe see where we could do better by ourselves, right? We are creating the best human being we possibly can, right? Maybe there's some advice there for us. It drew my attention to it. Like I said, I have no idea how Grace made it to the list without me having a clear understanding of what Grace truly was, right? I'm dishing out these, but at the same time, I am a student. So I took a lesson today and I'll delve into it a little bit deeper, right? Before I show up again here tomorrow. I have had a beautifully enjoyable day. I am in the midst of planning my trip for September. Oh my goodness, it's so much fun planning my trip, right? The itinerary is not even close, but I'm looking at camp spots and lakes and road maps and rock rock cuts in roads. Yeah, we're gonna have a great trip. Okay, you guys, day off number 2, it's done. I'm happy with the way it ended, right? And grateful that it started off the way it did, with a little bit of energy recouped after my weekend. Right? You can't ask for anything more. And if it's rainy tomorrow, who knows? And if it's not, maybe I'll get out and take in a little bit of Mother Nature. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow.